Hi everyone, this is Dragon GGY. Welcome back. This is the operator Hindsight for Logos. You don't want to miss out on this one. Logos is a 6-star core caster in the caster class. Trait of the archetype is very general, deals arts damage. Funny enough, Logos is the first caster we cover in this series. Core caster is the OG caster archetype, supposedly has higher single target damage potential than the more multi-target nature ones. Logos is the 4th 6-star core caster. We had Eyjafjalla, who many considered was generally the most well-rounded caster. KOB, who has benefited a ton from her module and the skyrocket enemy defense in hardcore content, landing herself 2 back-to-back CCB records. And also HoloHeyak, a kit specialized around Levitate. Other than KOB, who's purely single target, all others, including Logos, have skills that increase their target count, which is a nice addition to versatility. Logos do have the highest attack stats out of them, with a slightly thinner defense. Now let's get into his talents. Similar to Wizardel, Logos has 2 crazy talents that contributes to both his damage potential and support utility. Talent 1, when attacking a target, has a 40% chance to deal 60% of attack, 65 at potential 5, adds art damage to a random target in range and slow them for 0.8 seconds. This is basically free extra damage. It's an additional instance of damage, visualized as a bright platinum-colored projectile so that you can easily tell it apart from his main attacks, which are blue-colored. This additional damage is largely randomized in behavior. It seeks target randomly, including the target Logos is attacking. It has 6 different launch spots around Logos, and is launched 0 to 9 frames after the main attack. So, in some cases, mostly in skill 3, the additional damage may land before the main attack. This is Logos' core damage talent. It brings him multi-target ability, or extra damage for absolutely no cost when it's only one target. It doesn't interfere with his attacks, truly a man of art. It's, by expectation, a 26% increase to his total art damage. The slow, again, keeps targets in range. Under 1.6 second attack interval, it's effectively a 16% movement speed reduction, meaning that it goes up with his attack speed as well. Talent 2, attack inflicted resistance -10 and art damage taken plus 150, 165 at potential 3 on the target for 5 seconds. This damage is calculated as a flat number increase right before damage modifications. Take HoloHeyak as an example. It's gonna go through her attack modifier first, and then flat attack increase like Sculptor skill 2, then attack scales like her skill 3 scales and her talent scales. After all that's done, Logos basically rewrites this damage by adding an extra 165 on top of it, before putting it into things like resistance, fragile damage reductions, etc. Therefore, this talent does not introduce an extra damage instance. This is Logos' core support talent. It's a resistance shred, not ignore, so that, along with the arts damage amplification, is shared for all arts damage dealers to enjoy. Since the extra damage is the same number and does not scale up, it works with kits that have more instances of damage beta, like DOT types. Here are some of the synergies that I have used personally, like Ascalon's DOT talent, KOB since her talent gives her another damage instance every attack, and Re-Alter skill 2 when you do the double fireballs. Qiubai with her module has 3 instances of arts damage every attack and is the top recipient of this talent, which I will elaborate a bit later. You can check out the comparison I have on screen right now, and it's very significant. Not only that, this talent also increases Logos' own damage quality and potential. Don't forget, each time his talent 1 triggers, it benefits from his talents as well. And at the end, this 165 is always 165. You can say it isn't that significant when attack is high, but it certainly keeps some guaranteed damage under attack debuffs. And we aren't done just yet. There's another half of Talent 1 to talk about in Logos' module. He lands with the Core Caster Delta module, and landing with a Delta module certainly is a foreshadow of his exceptionality. Trade update: when dealing arts damage, deals an additional 8% of damage dealt as necrosis damage. Upgrades to his Talent 1, it now has 20% more chance to launch the extra damage at 60%. And if the target hit by that extra damage is in Necrosis Burst, it will apply another 60% of attack as elemental damage. So let's break it down, starting with the base. It's an arts damage to elemental impairment transfer. We've had that with Ebonholt's Delta, with Primal Casters, and we talked about their difference with Ritualists in the Virtuosa episode. Basically, to deal impairment, it has to go through resistance and damage reductions, meaning that the higher the damage potential of the operator themselves, the faster the necrosis buildup, and the more they benefit from this type of modules. That's a cruel fact about this snowballing design. It really is, the better gets even more, while the worse gets very limited improvement. Therefore, the base of this module is really good on Logos. He has high damage potential, multi-target, and resistant shred. All of this translates to faster necrosis buildup, and it's very effective even when enemies have medium to high resistance. For the upgrade, increasing the RNG by 20% is crazy. Expected arts damage potential up from 26 to 39%. The effective movement speed reduction from 16% to 24%. And for the elemental damage part, the significance is obvious. It adds a part to his total damage where it's not affected by resistance and damage reductions. It has an intricate design where the additional damage projectile, when it lands, will always deal arts damage before the elemental damage, meaning that if that hit triggers the necrosis burst via the arts damage transfer, it puts the elemental damage in right after as well. Logos have that high attack frequency with skill 2 and high attack multiplier with skill 3, both of which ensures that he can deal a good amount of elemental damage during the burst window. But do note that unlike Primal Casters or Ebonholt's Delta, even when the enemy is in Necrosis Burst, the elemental damage still has to rely on Talent 1 triggers to apply. So in short, Talent 1 triggers significantly determine how fast can Logos trigger Necrosis Burst and how much elemental damage he can put in during that time. Therefore, you will see some rather big fluctuation in his total damage in practice. Overall, looking at skill 3, the expected total damage increase by this module is an insane 70% plus. It introduces elemental damage, which we said is a pseudo true damage currently, bypassing resistance and damage reductions. Support-wise, the extra micro CC effectiveness is increased with the RNG, and the enfeeble from the Necrosis Burst is also a good addition. This is basically the second place of most improving modules in the game. The founder of Logos is Dominus. Level 3 is mandatory for all players. Don't even bother with him if you don't plan on giving him module level 3. Now for skills, my recommendation is skill 3 over skill 1 over skill 2. Skill 3 is his signature skill with massive DPS, multi-target, the most versatile arts damage skill in the game right now, and probably for a very long time. Skill 1 is an arts AFK skill with some decent effectiveness against mob hordes, while maintaining its single target lethality. Skill 2 is very specialized, a single target skill with potential in hardcore contents, but overall less applicable in general use, especially with a monstrous skill 3 over the top. Skill 1 attack range expands into a marksman range. Attack plus 100% immediately defeats enemy in range with HP below 150% of Logos' attack and deals arts damage equal to the HP of the defeated enemy to another random target. This is a 60-second warm-up skill with unlimited duration. Stats are as followed. Logos will kill off enemies with less than 2,565 HP, which otherwise will take 2 hits from him. It also has 1,650 DPS outside of Necrosis Burst and 2,835 within. Let's go over the details. The instant of it, which I like to call elimination, does not take up Logos' attack, and it's massive. It's an area of effect, or you can call it an aura, and it's still effective when Logos cannot attack. It works by dealing an astronomical number of true damage unsourced to the enemy, and therefore bypassing most dodge, accuracy, shield, and barrier mechanics. It does not work on damage instance-based HP enemies like the ones in Invitation to Wine. They will rewrite that damage number to 1, and since elimination is only attempted once, they will only take 1 HP damage. The damage that spawns from an elimination can actually trigger an additional attack from Talent 1, and can be amplified by Talent 2, so that's more damage over on paper numbers. The key targets to these skills are of course mobs with low HP, or some of the low HP enemies with high resistance or damage reduction. Here are some typical examples. So how do you actually use the skill? First of all, it can benefit from attack buffs to further increase elimination threshold, best paired with constant buffs like Scalter Skill 2 or Aya Talent. Don't expect it to kill everything though. Even with massive buffs in IS, it's still not as impactful as Skill 3 with those bonuses. The key application of this skill is still AFK. 1650 DPS is pretty okay, considering that there are extra from eliminations. It can be used in combination with others, preferably Arts Dealers, so that they enjoy the support from Logos' talent while lowering enemy HP to trigger elimination faster. Elimination is also a pro shared by everyone in range, so that they can save 1 or 2 attacks from finishing off enemies. Comparing to some similar Arts AFK skills, Aya Skill 2 has a lower DPS but does not need warm-up, 10 resistance ignore, and deals AoE and resistance shred on skill. Golden Glow Skill 2, when used against mob ports, has a DPS around 1822. 18 resistance ignore, deals AoE on explosion, but has a slightly longer warm-up time and is much weaker before skill comes up. But overall, the thing with Logos is that you can always use the skills alongside of him. Besides AFK, this skill is also deadly in prolonged fights against a single target, since Necrosis Burst is likely to be in play in these scenarios. Logos deals an expected DPS of 2835 during it, which is close to the damage of some dedicated single target annihilation skills. The term annihilation skill may be new to you. It's a term in CN referring to skills that you reserve for taking out key targets or a high pressure wave of enemies. Here are some examples as references. Neural Alter Skill 3 at 2555 DPS deals true damage when blocking. Typhon Skill 3 deals 2534 DPS against heavy enemies. KOB Skill 2 deals 2505 DPS against an enemy with 1500 defense and 50 resistance. Viviana Skill 3 deals 3222 DPS against elite all boss enemies with 0 resistance. Considering the 10 resistance shred, it's pretty comparable. Skill 2 Resistance plus 70. Attacks now lock onto a target, dealing 75% attack as arch damage every 0.5 seconds. When against the same target, gradually increases the attack scale up to a maximum of 3 times, which is 225%, while also gradually reduces its movement speed down to 40%, reaching maximum after 5 seconds. The locked on target and effects are reset when the skill is interrupted or when the target is defeated. This is a 20/30 20-second auto skill. Starting from this skill, the expected total damage is presented by simulating this skill in Python and getting the average number from 50,000 simulations. Like I said, Talent 1 makes its total damage fluctuates quite a bit, but these numbers should be able to reflect his performance well enough. The expected damage of this skill is 118.8k, with a DPS of 5,940 on non-boss enemies. For detailed damage composition and its performance against climbing resistance and enemy type, you can check out these complete graph. Notice how a skill with about 120k damage as 0 resistance still maintains about 80k at 50 resistance. Now let's break down the design of this skill. You can find the build-up pattern on the right. Basically, it's one tick of damage every 0.5 seconds for a total of 40 times. Damage and movement speed reduction ramps up to a maximum in 5 seconds. So against one target, it's a 5-second build-up and 15 seconds in full power. The skill gives logos a high attack frequency, so in turn, there are more Talent 1 triggers. The slow from that plus the movement speed reduction from skill basically locks the target in place. 40 damage instances, 24 expected Talent 1 triggers, all of them go through the 165 damage buff from Talent 2 as well. You can see how his kit constantly resonates within itself. Considering that skill 3 is definitely better with high attack speed, it's good to have this skill reserved for when there's attack speed debuffs. For other miscellaneous stuff, you can use logos to tank arts damage with this skill. It sounds silly, but 90 resistance really makes them tickle. Everyone hates resistance, okay? It also makes sense because there's no range expansion with this skill. Logos may have to pick up damage when using this skill, so the resistance increase can protect him against art enemies. It has a target lock-on for better priority, and due to it being an attack scale skill, it works with attack buffs best, which we will discuss in the synergy section a bit later. Overall, this is a specialized single target skill with decent numbers and designs, but at the end of the day, we do tend to prefer skills that can do multi-target, especially when it's a skill like skill 3. Skill 3, attack range expands, attack plus 300%. Attack 4 targets at once, enemy projectile speed in range is reduced by 95% and will be removed when the skill ends. This is a 30/45 30-second auto skill. The range expansion is the same as ULTIMA skill 3 or Flingers without the frontmost tile. Stats can be found in this table. With everything maxed out, the expected total damage for this skill is 137.8 thousand with a DPS of 4,425. And that is absolutely absurd. For detailed performance, you can refer to this complete graph here. Again, non-boss, boss, resistance, they all influence the final outcome. Here's a further detailed breakdown of Necrosis burst triggers within skill 3. Since skill 3 is a 30-second skill, it has enough room for 2 Necrosis burst triggers. This graph showcases the amount of times that Necrosis burst happened under different resistance of different enemies. Again, this is from 50,000 simulations on each resistance level. If the number is always 2, it means that it's 2 bursts in all of these simulations, and we can use the graph to find significant breakpoints. Overall, the results can be found on the right. Non-boss enemies within 51 resistance or less are guaranteed to get 2 bursts during skill 3, while 1 burst is guaranteed until 95 resistance, which is decent. For boss enemies, 2 bursts are possible for 26 resistance or less, but there's no guarantee. The important takeaway is that Logos is able to reliably trigger Necrosis bursts on boss enemies with less than 80 resistance, which is pretty insane. With that settled, let's go over the projectile removal part. It reduces the projectile speed or its angular speed to 0.05 times. However, not all projectiles can be slowed or removed. Some projectiles appear directly on its target, like the Sargat's Binding Casters or the Awakened Casters. Some projectiles are only visually a projectile and can't be slowed, like the Highmoor boss in IS3. If you think closely, it's not hard to realize that slowing projectiles don't actually change enemies' DPS, other than the first attack, which is gonna land a bit later than expected. Subsequent projectiles will still land in the same interval, so its only significance is buying more time before an ally starts taking damage, giving you time to react, like healing them up. Or it can allow an ally to trick more attacks from an enemy, which can be useful when used with fast redeployment units. Overall, this feature is mostly a bonus for the skill, but not a major selling point. Now, I'm gonna conclude why this is a dominant ceiling of arts damage skills. Number 1, target count. 4 targets is already decent, but since Talent 1 triggers independently for each target, you can have a maximum of 4 Talent 1 projectiles flying alongside 4 main attacks. Sure, it makes the damage on one particular target fluctuate greatly when multi-targeting, but you also have the potential to put 4 additional damage all onto one target. Number 2, a pretty comfy range. This is already a very big range for casters. More importantly, it makes sure that his Talent 2 will have increased coverage so that it works with others well. Number 3, the absolute currency, high damage potential and quality. 4000 plus DPS is crazy. It's higher than AF Yellow's skill 3, which has 3921 DPS. It includes elemental damage, resistance shred, so that it maintains 70% of total damage against enemies with 50 resistance. And finally, we have Cycle and Startup. 45-second downtime is very acceptable with the damage he offers, especially considering that Aya's skill 3, which is talked of, has an 80-second downtime. 15-second startup honestly is slowly getting into the long category nowadays. Certainly not the best. You know how it feels to wait 15 seconds for true Silver Slash, but that's perhaps the only problem you can pick from the skill. It just has everything that you could have asked for in a caster skill. Highly recommended. Next, let's talk a little bit about synergies. For skill 2, I made comparisons between Suzerain skill 3, Virtuosa skill 2 and skill 3, Stainless skill 1 as candidates. And here's the result. You can pause to read the graph. I have TLDRs coming up as well. I also did one with skill 3, which only includes Suzerain skill 3 and Virtuosa skill 3 due to skill duration matching. This skill also doesn't take attack buffs as good because it already has a big inherent multiplier. Also, as a side note, all of these results do not include Virtuosa's latest module, which is 6 months away from Logos. It will be too much focus on something that's not coming soon. So here's my advice on buffing Logos. Logos is a core caster with an elemental module. He's not a primal caster, meaning that most of his damage is still art damage at about 70%. It does go down with resistance, but doesn't drop below 50% until 90 resistance. On the other hand, we said that his Delta module scales with his art damage, so buffing art damage in a way is buffing both damage, and it brings a higher return than focusing on his elemental damage part. Therefore, Virtuosa is not exactly a very matching buff provider for Logos. For skill 2, you should actually focus on giving him attack buffs. I use Stainless skill 1 here because they are both 20-second duration skill. You can also use Warfarin skill 2, but only starts the buff after 5 seconds where it ramps up to max. Below that, Suzerain skill 3 is generally better than Virtuosa skill 3 with some back and forth. Virtuosa skill 2 is not as good as others, but it does have the closest matching cycle at 24 SP and 20 seconds versus Logos' 30 SP and 20 seconds. For skill 3, the easy takeaway is that use Suzerain skill 3 against non-boss enemies with less than 77 resistance and below 67 resistance for boss enemies. Otherwise, use Virtuosa skill 3 instead. At high resistance, some kits with resistance shred can also be effective like Pramonic skill 2, but their coverage or range or cycles may not match up as well with these two skills, so that's why I didn't include those. And then I also have this Logos plus Chilbai plus Suzerain trio to ship. They are the most mechanically matching trio in the game right now. It really feels like they are making use of every bit of one another's kit. They deal a total of, wait for it, 418.8 thousand damage, with the majority actually from Chilbai. Logos served as the team buffer and secondary damage role in this trio. They do have similar durations and cooldown as well. For Logos, he buffs Chilbai by adding that extra 165 to her every instance of damage, while helping with that crucial 10 resistance shred. Chilbai, with her latest Module X level 3, is the core damage dealer. Each of her attacks consists of 3 instances of arts damage, 1 from her main attack, 1 from her module base, and 1 more from her talent 1 trigger. That creates 22,770 damage out of nowhere with Logos' help. And finally, Synergies can provide crowd control to keep enemies in range while serving that stable slow for Chiobai to trigger her talent 1. She also amplifies all of the arts damage by 1.5 times, while also accelerating Logos' necrosis buildup. So, to conclude, Logos is a 6-star core caster who serves as a cutting-edge arts damage dealer and a team support at the same time. He has high DPS, multi-target via talents and skill, and damage quality ensured by Resistance Shred and Elemental Damage module. He also shares the Resistance Shred and arts damage increase to the whole team, which is most welcomed. For performances in future events, it's very similar to Visadel. His skill 3 is dominant in the arts damage scene. He has solid AFK performance with skill 1, or if you don't mind, a couple more clicks with skill 3 will suffice for daily content. In RA, you can of course use him wherever you need some good damage, and it's a good place to try out the potential of the Logos, Chiobai, Synergies trio, adding extra buffs, foods, to experience melting down those bosses with millions of HP in one go. In integrated strategy, I wouldn't be as assertive as to say that he's the number 1 caster pick, but he certainly is one of the strongest options across all classes and can be a good starter and damage core, enjoying a good amount of relics. For daily rating, I have him at 9. Like Visadel, his skill 3 is destructive enough to wrap up stages in 1 or 2 uses. Even with his AFK skill 1, it still brings high lethality to single target and is assuring. His Resistance Shred and Elemental Damage guarantees effectiveness against most enemies and is the number 1 arts skill you go for whenever you need one. For advanced, I also have him at 9. His specialization is basically having everything it takes to be a good arts damage dealer and overkills it with perks that can be shared by others. His performance in RA and IS is also proven and speaks for themselves. High quality damage is his advantage in CC. Even with attack debuffs, he can still trigger Necrosis burst pretty reliably on his own. The arts damage increase in Talent 2 is also not affected by attack debuffs, but that's theory crafting for now. Finally, for numbers, I don't think I need to read those again. The stats they put in for both his damage and support aspects are just generous. Pool analysis, this is very similar to Visadel as well. She's the new ceiling of damage dealers, but she can deal arts damage after all, so when you need arts, you need Logos, and he's the new director in that department. Gameplay elements are simple, he's just leading arts damage in most aspects, especially in damage, the currency of all things. He also is much more of a team player than Visadel. He benefits from others very well, and he benefits others very well too. You do need to invest a lot for him, but at the same time, it's definitely your money worth. For schedule and meta, he's basically the vice president of damage behind Visadel, so his performance is not hard to predict. If you need an arts dealer as a newer player, go for him with all you've got. You can find synergy between him and a lot of arts dealers, and even though I said Virtuosa wasn't his best partner, it doesn't feel awkward to play into that Necrosis team either. That becomes more true with Nim coming soon. If, for some reason, you are not getting him in this banner, at least you can try again in a triple radar banner about 4 months later, where you can select 2 others in this banner to join that radar. Honestly, I wouldn't recommend you to pull in this one at all unless you lack and absolutely want 3 out of these 6. But yeah, that's the info for you. That's gonna be it for this episode. Special shout out to my friend YamotoSaki for helping out with the coding. It has been a very challenging episode to make and to get right. I'll get the updates done on the module part of things before moving on to Civilized Eterna. As always, thank you for watching until the end. Leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.